and welcome to the last chapter of Music and Geography. So far we have visited three places in the world, three beautiful places. We've been to Indonesia, to Cuba, and to Greece and the Balkans, this region of the world. And we saw some parts of their music. Of course, the music of all those places is so huge. There's so many information, we just could see a small surface of it. But just to get an introduction, and perhaps this leads us to further investigation and research about the musical culture of each of these locations. So today, for our last chapter, we take a flight from Greece and we go back to Asia and we go to India. So India has a huge and rich music tradition, as you all might know already, and it's worth spending several lives to study it, I would say. But we'll just see some important elements, of course, with the instruments and different styles of music, and then one common characteristic that exists in all over India in terms of their music. So first of all, there are two important categories of Indian classical music. And these two categories are the Hindustani music and the Carnatic music. These two types of music have some common elements, of course. They have ragas, that's another word for scales or modes. So they both share this element of modal music, which is all based on a drone. There's no harmony like we have harmony in Western music. So there are a lot of ragas. My cat appeared again. There's a lot of ragas in each style of music, in Hindustani and Carnatic music. Another common element is the element of tala. If you watched also the MOOCs with music and mathematics, you will know what tala is. But tala essentially is the meter. So they use talas. They have the same, they have not the same, they have different kind of talas which establish meter. The same way we talked about the different rhythms in Greece, in 7/8, 5/8, and the Balkans and all that region, and the 11/8 and all these different combinations. There's also tala in 3, tala in 4, tala in 5, tala in 10, tala in 27, you name it. There's a lot of talas. And both of these music share this element together. They both have talas. And another element they share is the sruti. Sruti is a relative music pitch, where do is do, re is re, in terms of hertz and everything else. So these are the common elements between these two musical cultures of India. Now, there are of course a lot of differences between these two. The oldest music tradition is Carnatic music, so it started developing from there, and then it moved to Hindustani music, which Hindustani music had other influences as well. Since India is such a huge country with so many diverse cultural aspects from one region to another one, it was natural that this would occur. And of course, this difference also exists within each tradition. Within Hindustani music, there are lots of different variations, and within Carnatic music, the same. But let's say in the whole India, there are these two main categories of Indian classical music. Now, let's talk about each one of them differently, just to have an idea of what it is all about. The first difference would be the instruments they use. So in Hindustani music, the percussion they use, the main percussion is tablas, that you might already know already. Tablas is two sets of percussion instruments that they are played very skillfully by virtuoso performers. And another instrument is the sitar, which is very common in Hindustani music, that you will all know from different legends like Ravi Shankar and many more. It's a very unique sound that this instrument has, a huge string instrument that is being played by a performer. And other instruments like the sarangi and the veena, which are other string instruments that are very common in Hindustani music. The harmonium, which is something like a wind instrument but played on a keyboard. These are some of the characteristic instruments of Hindustani music. And of course, there are instruments that appear in both cultures, in Hindustani and Carnatic music, and one of them is the human voice. Human voice is very elaborately used in these cultures, and is actually considered one of the most refined musicians if you are a singer, because usually singers are also singing, are executing complicated rhythmical parts, but they are also the tala keepers, the ones who are keeping the tala, like the maestros of an ensemble. Not in all cases, but in many cases, this is the case. So let's watch a video of Hindustani music just to get an idea of how this sounds. Of course, these pieces are long, so we're not gonna spend a lot of time watching this video, but let's spend some minutes watching this video. And now let's talk about Carnatic music. So in Carnatic music, of course, there are these instruments that are very common, which is the voice, the bansuri, which is the flute, and many more. But the special instruments, I would say, for Carnatic music that they really also establish the color of Carnatic music, as well as all the rhythmical content and the development that the music has, is the mridangam, which is a percussion instrument played like that, which essentially the story says that if you take a mridangam and you cut it in two, you get the tablas. So even if you see how it looks, you can already have this idea. And the interesting thing about the percussion part in Carnatic music is that in Hindustani music, the percussion is more like accompanying and establishing the groove, but in Carnatic music, the percussion instrument has a different role. It's more of a linear role. It's almost like a melodic instrument, but without playing melodies. So it follows, it does linear lines, it reflects to what the singer is saying, and all the rest. You can hear that also in the musical example I will play later on. Another strong characteristic of Carnatic music is the violin. So in Carnatic music they have violin, strange enough, but they also play it in a different way than they play in a classical orchestra. In a classical orchestra would play like this, but in Carnatic music they bend down, they hold it like this, and they play like this. So the sound is really different. Of course the music is different, but also the sound coming from the instrument is different because of the position of the instrument. And this is very widely known as one of the main instruments of Carnatic music. And of course there are other instruments like the kanjira, which is a percussion instrument, the bansuri I talked before. The voice again is really important and considered like a very refined and high in the hierarchy of musicians, and many more. So let's listen now to an example of Carnatic music just to get a sensation of how it sounds like and how different in the end of the day it is from Hindustani music. So I hope you enjoyed the example of Carnatic music and that you realized like the difference I was talking about. Now let's look into something, a musical element which is appearing in both traditions, and I find this really interesting to talk about because this is also an element that usually creates the connection also with the musicians and the audience. And this in Hindustani music is called Tihai, and in Carnatic music is called Muktai. Essentially what this is, it's a certain musical phrase, rhythmical phrase I would say more, which usually happens at the end of the piece but also sometimes between the piece as well, which is usually understood also by the audience, and they follow this, so they know when this climax is going to happen, and when it actually happens it creates this wonderful bridge between audience and musicians together, so they are all connecting in the same sphere at the end of the day. So this topic would be more theoretical to explain you what is this about, and also to make one, just to see how you can make one and perhaps use it in your own music or in any way you would like. So a Tihai or a Muktai, basically, it's a polyrhythmic technique found in Indian classical music, which is, as I said, usually happens at the end of the piece, and it's performed by an instrument or sung, or sometimes it's being performed by all the musicians of an ensemble. There are many cases. The characteristic thing about this concept is that basically it's a phrase, it's a musical phrase that is repeated 3 times, and it's identical. Each time is identical. There are of course variations and there are developments, so one phrase could be a little bit different, but then the third phrase would be also a little bit different, plus a little bit different, and many more. But the idea is that it's a phrase that is repeated 3 times and finishes on 1. And that's the important thing, that it finishes on 1. In most cases it also starts on 1, that's not in all cases though, but in all cases it finishes on 1. And this is the one that the musicians and the audience connect as well. For example, I will show you a very simple version of a Muktai or a Tihai. And as you can see here, I have this phrase that is 4 16 notes plus an 8 note. Okay, that if you repeat it 3 times, it falls on 1 in a 4/4 measure. So if I would do it, it would be something like this. Take dimi dim, take dimi dim, take dimi dim. You see, the dim, the last dim, falls on 1. I use now syllables from Konakol, which is also the method they use there to sing rhythmically. But you can do it any way you like. You could do like taka taka ta, taka taka ta, taka taka ta. Right? So the phrase is taka taka ta. And if you do this 3 times, then the last ta falls on the 1. Taka taka ta, taka taka ta, taka taka ta. Okay? Now I'm doing it, I'm counting in 2, but if I would count in 4, so it's like taka taka ta, taka taka ta, taka taka ta. This is a very simple T-high or a Moog-tie. Now, another one that we can try to do to make this a little bit more interesting is we can make one but also add some rests in between. The previous one was all the way through the same. Ta 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 ta. Alright, there's no rest or anything like that. Now let's construct one using some rests. And the way we will construct it is, first of all, by deciding how many meters, how many cycles of tala we want to make this Moog-tie on. So we said, okay, let's make it on two cycles. So it's 2 cycles long. So that's 8 beats long. And let's make it in 16th notes. So 8 beats times 4, because each beat has 4 16th notes, that's 32nd subdivisions, right? So we have 32 plus 1, which is the 1 that we finish, subdivisions to create this idea. So based on these calculations, I made a simple one where I created a phrase that uses 9 subdivisions, and then I added 3 subdivisions rest between each phrase. So we have 3 phrases, and between there are 2 gaps. So I filled in those gaps with 3 subdivision rest, 3 16th notes rest. So we have 9, 3, rest, 9, 3, and then we have 8 plus 1, which is 9. The plus 1 is just to show that, okay, the last 1 falls on the 1. Okay, now let's try to sing it. So our phrase is ta, ta, ka, ta, ta, ka, ta. Okay, as you can see also at the example. Ta, ta, ka, ta, 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 ta. So now let's do this 3 times and try to add 3 16 notes rest in between. So that would be 1, 2, 3, 4. Tam ta ka ta ta ka tam. Tam ta ka ta tam ta tam. Tam ta ka ta tam ta tam. You see, I finished on the 1. Let's do it again, and now try to focus on the rest. I will also count the rest so you see that I am on track. 3, 4. Tam ta ka ta 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 ta. 1, 2, 3. Tam ta 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 tam ta ta. 1, 2, 3. Tam ta ka ta tam ta ta. You see, the rest was when I was counting 1, 2, 3, and it's what these gaps were in between. Now let's do it again. I will try to clap following the tala. So only on 1. 3, 4. Tan ta ka ta tam ta tam. Tan ta ka ta tam ta tam. Tan ta ka ta tam ta tam. And that's it. So if this would be a concert and I would start doing this, from the very first one, the audience would most likely understand what I would be doing. So they would expect me to do the second one, so that they know when the third one is going to happen, and then tan ta ka ta tan ta tan, finish all together, and then clap or whatever happens at the end of any piece of music. Okay, now I want to show you how I made this Moog-tie, because I talked very fast in how I made it, just to show you an example of these 3 phrases that are being repeated. And let's do it step by step to see how we can make a Moog-tie. So the first thing we do is to decide how many cycles in our tala we want to work with. So let's assume that we want to do something on 4 cycles of tala. So 4 bars of 4, 4. Okay, great, we have this now. Then we calculate how many beats are in these cycles. So how many beats? 4 times 4, 4, that's 16 beats. All right, fair enough. We move on. What's the next step? We want to decide the rhythmical subdivision, our speed, the speed that we make this T high or muktai on. So we decide, okay, let's do it on 16th notes, since we did the previous ones on 16 notes. Okay, so now we have to calculate how many 16th notes are found in these beats. So we have 16 beats in total, and each beat has 4 16th notes. So 16 beats times 4 16th notes, that's 64 16th notes. So we have 64 16th notes to work with. Then, as I mentioned earlier, we have to add one more 16th note, because that's the one of the next bar where we want to finish, because 64 we would finish on 1 2 3 4, we would finish there, but we want to finish on 1 2 3 4 1. So we add one more 16th note to the 64. So in total we have 65 16th notes. Great. Okay, so we have this. Now what would be the next step? Let's try to find a number close to 65, not more but less, that we can divide by 3. Okay, so some of the options are 54, 57, 60 and 63, right? 66 is more, 65 cannot be divided. So let's try to use one of these numbers. It could also be less, it could be 51, it could be 48, etc. It has to be divided by 3 though. So let's choose one of these numbers. I personally like 57. So let's pick 57 for this case. All right, now we have 57. So if we divide 57 by 3, then we have the number 19. So what is this number? This will be the number that the duration of our phrase will have. So our phrase will have 19 16 notes of duration, because if we multiply 19 by 3 times, like the previous steps, we get to 57, which is a number close to 65. So we chose 57, we divided it by 3, we got 19, and then we have the duration over phrase. 19 16 notes per phrase. Okay, but then, so we have 57, but the total duration is 65. What happens with the rest? So in this case, we have to subtract 57 from 65, and we have the number 8. This 8 is the number of 16 notes that we haven't used already, but we need to involve them in order to make this complete and in order to fill on 1. So what do we do with this 8? We create the rests. Like in the previous example that I used 3 rests to show you this example. In this case, we have 3 phrases of 19, and we have 2 gaps to fill in with rests. So with number 8, that's very easy. We use 4 16 notes here and 4 16 notes here, and then our phrase is complete. So we use each gap, which has to have the same length as well, will have 4 16th notes. So our muktai will be 19 notes for rest, 19 notes for rest, 18 plus 1, which is 19. The plus 1 again is the 1. Okay, great. Now let's make it. So I will construct a phrase on 19 with 19 16 notes in length. And this is the phrase I came up with, which is 1 and dim take ta dim ke dim ta dim ke dim dim take ta. One more time. 3 and dim take ta dim ke dim ta dim ke dim ta take dim. As you saw, I used 2 different syllables each time. I'm just doing it by instinct because I have been using Konakol, so I know how to use these syllables. But for the moment, just focus on the phrase from a rhythmical content, just to see its 8th note to 16 notes and so on. So this is 19th, 16 notes in length. Then let's try to put some syllables on this phrase, like the ones I use, just so we can make it happen. So I use these syllables for this phrase. Dim, ta, ke, ta, dim, ke, dim, ta, dim, ke, dim, ta, ta, ke, dim. Now, let's try to make it. So we used our phrase, and let's put it 3 times, and using also the gaps in between. So that would be 3, 4. Dim, ta, ke, ta, dim, ke, dim, ta, dim, ke, dim, ta, ta, ke, dim. Dim, ta, ke, ta, dim, ke, dim, ta, dim, ke, dim, ta, 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 ke, dim. Dim, ta, ke, ta, dim, ke, dim, ta, dim, ke, dim, ta, ta, ke, dim. So 3 times I repeat this phrase, I use the gaps, and then ta, ta, ke, dim, and that's where it finishes. So let's also now, since we're doing this, let's hear it once also with some music. So what I did is that I also put some random notes on it, just to see how it sounds. But the important thing is that this phrase, if it's going to be repeated, the same way it's repeated rhythmically, the same way it will be repeated from a melodic perspective. So you will hear the same melody 3 times. Let's hear it now. I hope you could realize the feeling of repetition 3 times. So it repeats 3 times, and then we finish on 1. Let's hear it one more time and try to clap the tal, and also to understand the rhythmical content. 2, 3, 4. Four cycles that we chose before, a phrase that repeats 3 times, and we finish on 1. What a way to conclude a piece, and also to conclude this series of MOOC, Music and Geography. I hope you could get a glimpse and an idea of some fascinating music from 4 different parts of the world. Of course, there's so many parts with so much different music. We need a lot of time to cover everything, and this is just the surface. So I would invite you, in case you found some of these ideas interesting, to discover more and to go deeper and find more things about gamelan music, or about music from Greece, or about other fascinating things about Indian music, and many more. So I leave you here, and I wish that you can enjoy this information, and that you could travel by what we've listened to and what we've done in these parts of the world. Take care. Bye bye.